Hello, it's Dr. Stacy Francis, and this presentation is on how to stop overeating. And I'm going to give credit to Brooke Castillo, who owns the Life Coach School. She teaches life coaches to be life coaches, and she was, all her teaching is what really taught me how to do all the things and create this presentation for you. So I'm going to give kudos to her for this presentation. How to stop overeating. So losing weight is a series of decisions, and decisions happen here. Decisions happen in our evolved brain, the frontal part of our brain. We also have a primitive brain. Our primitive brain is what developed first when we were evolving. When we were evolving, our primitive brain was there so that we would not go hungry. We would make sure that we had everything we needed to survive. That's what the primitive brain is for. The primitive brain has no real cognitive thinking. It only knows that its whole purpose is for you to survive. Our primitive brain is all about urgency, repetitiveness, instant gratification, ensures our survival, and is self-preserving. It has urgency. Like if I'm hungry, I need to eat right now, and I'm going to find a way to do that. It has repetitiveness. If I know I can find berries over there, and that is what's going to make sure that I don't starve to death, I'm going to return there in a pattern because every time I go there, I know there's going to be berries. Instant gratification, the primitive brain doesn't have like a waiting mechanism or a higher thought process. Like if I just wait to do this, then I'll do this. It is instant gratification. And that's why it ensures our survival. It's all about feeding, fighting, fleeing, and that other fun word that adults do in bed. The evolved brain is the frontal brain. It is our impulse control. It is problem solving. It is motor function. It is thinking. It's planning. It's reasoning. And it's decision making. Choosing to lose weight comes from here. There are two reasons we overeat. Number one, our brain gets hijacked. Number two, we have unprocessed emotions. So let's start. When our brain gets hijacked, it is when our frontal thinking gets pushed to the side and our primitive brain comes to the front. Anything that happens in our lives can be good or bad or neutral, but a trigger is something that comes from something really good or really bad, and that will trigger us. When you eat ice cream, it stimulates the reward centers in your brain. It creates more dopamine, makes you feel good. You do that some more so you can feel that feeling again, and you can keep that feeling going. Your memory will be next time you want to feel good, you will eat ice cream. Or if you see ice cream going by, like an ice cream truck, you'll say, oh, I know that makes me feel good. And so you eat ice cream. So the trigger will be anything good that it's like, oh, we have to celebrate. And I remember celebration and feeling good, ice cream. Or we can have a trigger of, oh, I had a really bad day. I know what makes me feel better, ice cream. So ice cream is equal to feeling good, but that creates a craving of feeling good using ice cream. So the next time you see ice cream, you crave it even if you're not hungry. That makes you feel good in your brain, and that leads to a habit, not a habit that we want. A hijacked brain comes from a few things. One, a hijacked brain will happen if you see ice cream. You know it makes you feel good. You crave that ice cream because you want to feel good, or you want to feel better, or you want to go from not feeling good to feeling better. Like it is what you're using instead of dealing with having a really good thought in your head in regard to what's better for me, what's healthier for me. Instead, we use this craving to get hijacked, and our primitive brain takes over. Another way our brain gets hijacked is when we skip meals. If you skip meals, then your primitive brain will take over saying, I don't trust that frontal brain of yours because it's not keeping me alive. I'm going to starve to death if I don't eat right now. And so it will have you reach for something that is high carbohydrate because that's quick sugar. And the brain will calm down when it has quick sugar because it will release all the dopamine. Your brain will say, oh, you're fueling me. I'm good. And it will calm down. But if you don't skip meals, if you eat every 3 to 4 hours, just like we do in the supercharge method, you will not have that reaching for carbohydrates. Your brain will not get hijacked and you will stay in your frontal, good reasoning thinking. Another thing other than that hijacks our brain is flour and alcohol, because flour is just concentrated grains, which turns into sugar quicker in our bloodstream. When we eat oats, which is a really slow carbohydrate, it trickles in. But if we turn that oat into oat flour, then it rushes in, and then we have a lot more concentrated carbohydrate that stimulates those dopamine receptors. And alcohol does the same thing. In fact, alcohol will take away our reasoning and put our frontal brain to sleep, and our primitive brain will say, oh, I can just party now. And all our reasoning of why we want to do things will go to sleep, and we will overindulge and overeat. One of the ways that we can stop the sugar cravings is by stopping sugar altogether. But that doesn't mean you have to forego having sweet things. What you can do instead is choose erythritol or monk fruit or stevia or even fruit in a limited capacity. These things will not spike your insulin and they won't spike dopamine. And so you won't have this addiction going on. You will actually be able to be in control. And in my past groups, they found that even this group, if they found they've gone without sugar long enough, then they don't crave it anymore. So that's why we want to do that. Now let's talk about unprocessed emotions. Unprocessed emotions contribute to stress, which contributes to seeking comfort. When we have an unprocessed emotion, it just feels bad, and we don't want to feel bad, so we will seek comfort. We will look for a dopamine hit in the form of food or alcohol, drugs, caffeine, smoking, and video games. But we can also increase dopamine in our feel-good centers, our reward centers, by using exercise or meditation or listening to music. And most importantly, processing our emotions. So how do we do that? How do we process our emotions? One, we need to be present with the vibrations in our body that these feelings give us and not run from them or be reactive. We want to feel our feelings. It is so important to sit with your feelings and just feel them. Wouldn't it have been wonderful for us to learn how to do this in 3rd grade, to really feel our feelings instead of eating them or drinking them or dealing with them in a very dysfunctional way? Now we get to do it. So now we're going to practice processing our emotions. When we process our emotions, there's 6 steps to not overeat from our emotions. And so this is what we're going to talk about. 1, we're going to write. There's 2 things that we're going to write. 1, we're going to write down what we're going to eat before we make the decisions based on gratification and urges. If you don't have a plan and you go to a buffet, it is more than likely you're going to choose foods that are not healthy for you. They're going to sound good at the moment, and if you're really hungry, you're going to once again crave those carbohydrates first. And that's what's going to go down your gullet first. As opposed to if you write it down and you're not skipping meals and you don't go into a meal completely starving out of your head, then you're going to make really good decisions because you're going to follow your plan. Primitive brain looks for instant gratification. Its goal is to stimulate dopamine receptors, to give comfort, and to keep you from thinking you're going to starve to death. Your prefrontal cortex is your frontal thinking, your reasoning, and you can choose to plan ahead of time with your most educated decisions. You know what it takes to reach your goals. And when you are doing it, when you're not hungry, you will put into place exactly what it will take for you to reach your goals. Oh, the second way I want you to write is those unprocessed emotions. So it's so important for you to feel what you're feeling with your emotions. Like, where do you feel anger when you're feeling anger? Do you feel it in your throat? Do you feel it in your head? Do you feel it in your belly? Like, where do you feel these emotions? It has its own vibration, and you want to identify where in your body you're feeling it. And then you want to write it down. You want to write down your feelings and all the situations that are associated with it. Brooke Castillo has a method that she uses where she will have you write down the circumstance of the situation. What actually happened, that if you were in a court of law, this is actually what happened. And then she'll say, what feelings do you have associated with that? And you have those feelings, then what action did you do? So if my boss yells at me and I feel horrible and I feel worthless because my boss yelled at me, I might go and eat a jar of cookies. So the circumstance is my boss yelled at me. The action is I ate the cookies, and the feelings I had was unworthiness. But what Brooke says is that before all this, you had a thought. So from the circumstance, you had a thought before you even had the feeling. I must have had a thought that it could have been anything. It could have been, my thought was that my boss doesn't like me, or my boss doesn't think I'm good enough. So that thought is what drove those feelings, which drove that particular action. Instead, what we can do is we can change that thought, and make sure you put this on paper, because you can change that thought and say, okay, if I thought this, what if I could actually think my boss has a deadline and is depending on me to get there, and I could do better, or I did my best and I did everything that I was able to do, and my boss just didn't realize it. Now I can have feelings of I'm doing my best, or I'm going to try harder. Those are feelings that can put me into a different kind of action. I'm doing my best. Gives me a little more comfort and space so that I don't have to eat my feelings. Or I'm going to try harder is I'm going to put this into play and this into play so that I can function at a higher level. And that would lead me to have a better action than eating a jar of cookies. When you write down your plan, write down exactly what you're going to eat. Pick the best foods for your body. Try to avoid sugar and flour. Make sure you avoid your food sensitivities and your inflammatory foods. I know we just did some food sensitivity testing on some of the people in the program, and some of them were really surprised at what they found, and some were not surprised at what they found. But it's really good to identify your food sensitivities and then avoid them, because they just cause inflammation. This particular template of a 24-hour plan will be part of this program, so you can either utilize it from you can either access it through our website, or we will email it to you upon request. Eat exactly what you plan. Now that you put it down on paper, that's what you're going to eat. That's what you're going to go to. You can look at that whole list of what you have offered up and to eat for that day, and you can choose what you're going to eat from that page because you wrote it down. That's your plan, and you chose it in your highest brain function. Include the foods that you know you will eat to practice being consistent to keeping your word to yourself. Then improve your food choices. If you have a really bad habit of eating cookies at 3 p.m., then continue with that, eating the cookies at 3 p.m., but maybe switch to a healthier cookie, or maybe then switch to a piece of fruit, or maybe then switch to not eating, but including that fruit with your meal and not snacking. So it's a progression, but allow yourself some grace and time to go through the process and learn what you need to do to be your word, to put down on the paper exactly what you're going to eat. The more you plan ahead and eat according to your plan, you consistently quiet down the primal brain and reinforce that cognitive thinking and operating. And this will lead to healthier habits. Allow. When you have an urge for anything off plan, you're going to allow the urge and all those yucky emotions to be there. You're going to sit with the urge for 10 minutes. And this is gold. Do not skip this, because that urge for any of that food, that sugar, that carbohydrate, that piece of pizza, it will feel important. It will feel compelling. It will feel justified. It will feel like no big deal. It's just a bite. You want to feel those feelings for 10 minutes before you eat that food. And when you do that, you're practicing a muscle. You're getting used to feeling your feelings. And it will take many times. When we're building a muscle, how many times do you have to lift a weight to actually increase that muscle? If you do it 3 times, do you see the muscle build? No. But it takes a lot of times. It takes more than 3 times. It takes more than 10 times. It takes 100 times, give or take, for you to actually see a change in that muscle. And that's what we're doing here. We are practicing building our urge muscle. 100 allowed urges will give you transformation. When you do not react, reward yourself. When you do not eat that thing, you take a little glass bead and put it in a little glass bowl or a little glass dish, and you hear the ting. And that is a wonderful dopamine response for our brain, because our primal brain loves accumulating. So seeing those beads add up, our brain loves that. And our brain likes action and completion. The act of putting the bead in the jar is a reward and it helps deconditioning. If you lower your desire to overeat, weight loss will happen. So I hated being in front of the camera to do videos, but I knew that it was important for my practice and for all the things I'm doing, like being a public speaker. I knew that being in front of the video was just as important as being in front of a crowd. It's so much easier for me to be in front of a crowd that it took me like 80 takes to do 1 2-minute video when I first started out. And you might see a lot of videos now because I've been committing myself to 100 videos so that I'm building that muscle of being more comfortable in front of the camera and not stumbling over my words or forgiving myself if I do. Track. Let's go talk about the next step, which is track. You can track your weight, or better yet, you can track your measurements. Get used to seeing the data without it making it mean anything about you. It doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It doesn't mean that you're worthless. It just is a number and it's a guide. So when you look at any numbers, whether they're measurements or their weight, continue doing whatever you're doing for 2 weeks. And if you're going to switch something, switch one thing, one variable for another 2 weeks and evaluate every 2 weeks. Because when you change one thing, you'll see either you moving in the positive direction after 2 weeks or negative, and then you'll know what to switch again or track or change. So list your urges. An urge is an emotion that intensely drives action. Note if you reacted to the urge, and that's how you're going to track things. So if you don't indulge in your urges, you're going to see things move in the direction you want them to. And then repeat. Repeat to 100 urges. Repeat until you have achieved your goal. This method is easy once it becomes a habit. The road there can feel difficult. You can feel all the yucky emotions, but let it feel difficult. In order to overcome what causes us to overeat, we have to override our primitive brain. We have to allow ourselves to be uncomfortable, something our primitive brain fights really hard to avoid. I know you can do hard things. I see it all the time. The primitive brain is determined to pursue and maintain comfort of familiarity, being safe, staying the same, being in a predictable environment, avoiding emotions that might feel overwhelming. But there's also comfort in knowing that you can handle discomfort. You can do hard things. I know you can, because some of you have been in the military. Some of you have climbed mountains. Some of you have graduated. Some of you have done weightlifting and lifted heavy things. Some of you have run marathons. Some of you have had children. That's hard. These are hard things. And I know you can do hard things because you've done them before. So I believe in you, and have a great day.